Welcome to the From Harm to Healing podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jones, and I'm a therapist who runs the From Harm to Healing treatment program, an online program for men who have engaged in infidelity or compulsive sexual behaviors within the context of an intimate relationship. I started this podcast to illuminate some of the common blind spots within the treatment fields for compulsive sexual behavior or sex addiction through the lens of the deceptive sexuality trauma model. I hope you find this resource enlightening, particularly if you're somebody navigating the pain of betrayal and deception for yourself. Thank you for listening to the From Harm to Healing podcast. In last week's episode, I posted the first part of a discussion I had with Dr. Minwalla about the topic of healthy masculinity. And in today's episode, I'm posting the second half of that conversation.
And guys, if you want some direction on which way to go, honest, loving, and whole. That's how you move towards healthy masculinity. Honest, loving, and whole. I guarantee that will lead to a healthier human being and healthier masculinity.
And it seems like if we don't have that relationship with the self or love for the self, we're losing out. I think this is something you said in the previous conversation we had. You're losing out on the resource that we have, those internal resources we have for change. So it might be that if I hate the self, or I'm not connected to the self, that I am more likely to consume from external sources, consume from other people. Or it might be that I'm likely to wear a mask and just try and be what I think people want me to be. And that's why this conversation we're having right now feels really important, because if we're just saying, no, this is the new box, this is the new script, I'm maybe still just wearing a mask, trying to be what Chris Jones told me to be or what Dr. Minwalla told me to be. And so this idea of having that resource, that true connection with the self, feels like that can move a man from being someone that maybe consumes from others, disempowers other people. And that's what we see, obviously, with the secret sexual basement, towards a masculinity that seems, trying to think of a good word, but almost generative, like a masculinity that emits to other people and gives to other people and connects to other people rather than consumes from them. And that's something else that comes up in my mind when I think of these words, frequencies and vibrations. Frequencies are things that are emitted from us. And so it comes back to the self is the start of all of those things.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in treatment recovery, a lot of men like you're working with, Chris, right? They're really ultimately looking to change. And they're trying to change usually themselves. And so where is the source of change going to come from? It's going to come from within them. Their ego, their thought system, how they do emotions, how they see themselves. So if you're looking to change yourself and you're only looking on the outside for answers and you're avoiding getting to know yourself and tuning into yourself and establishing a relationship with the self, I don't know where you're expecting change to come from if it's not from yourself. So it's imperative. There's really no other choice. If you want to make changes about yourself, you have to get to know yourself. So it is pretty fundamental to develop a relationship with the self. And then one definition of healthy masculinity, and this is more for the future, but in the future, I'm hoping that part of the definition and thinking and consciousness of men and healthy masculinity is that we as men become more conscious of our vibrations and how our vibrations are impacting human life, and becoming more not only conscious of our vibrations, but responsible for the vibes we put out in the world and how they impact people. And that's a level of consciousness that I think is really healthy and important. And that's kind of the consciousness that I'm trying to move towards here, is a vibrational consciousness. What kind of vibes are you putting out in the world, and how do those vibes impact people? And are you aware of that? And can you change those vibes so that you're impacting people in a better way? So violence is vibrational, love is vibrational, right? And that takes us to the whole concept of dishonesty is vibrational. Intentionally manipulating reality is a vibration that promotes disease. Intentionally accurate, authentic reality is a vibration that promotes health.
One of the things that strikes me as you talk is that I would say without a high view of self or a good connection with the self, we can't really be aware of the impact we have or the vibes that emit from us. So if I have a low view of self, I don't like myself, I'm not in touch with myself, it's probably easy to think that I don't really have much impact on anyone. You know, I'm a nobody. I'm nothing. I'm not emitting anything into the world. What I do doesn't really impact other people. Whereas if I conversely have a high view of self, I value myself, I respect myself, I know myself, I'm so much more likely to be aware of the impact I have on others around me and the power of my actions and my voice and the way I am in the world. So it once again comes back to the same point of self-contact that everything seems to come back to when we have these conversations.
Exactly. If you're conscious of your vibrations, that means you're very in touch with yourself and the energy going on inside you. And when you're angry, you can feel it, you can analyze it, you can slow down, you can regulate it. There's a lot of contact with the self in being able to do all of that. And then if you keep evolving, then you become more and more aware of yourself, including the energy, the vibrations. And then through your own vibrations and your own health, whatever is going on inside you vibrates out. One way to think about it is, and this is pretty relevant to our work, integrity, being honest. It feels different inside. When you're honest, it's light. There's space. When you're honest, you feel good about yourself. Self-esteem comes easily. Feeling confident comes easily, more easily. Looking at hundreds and hundreds of patients' artwork over the years, and one of the drawings I have men draw the abuser. And looking at their artwork, one way I would describe the lack of integrity is it's like tar. It's black and heavy. It feels like tar. If you're dishonest, especially if you're engaging in the secret sexual basement, which is a whole system of dishonesty the whole time, then it's going to really impact how somebody feels inside. They're not going to feel light. They're not going to enjoy the benefits of honesty and how that vibrates inside the human being. They're going to feel something the opposite. Very dark, very shut down. It closes down cells. Honesty opens up cells. It's light. It's completely different vibrationally. When you tell a lie, you can feel a shift sometimes in energy. What is that shift when you tell a lie? And when people come clean and admit what they've done, coming clean, what does that mean? Coming clean. It feels good. It feels relieving. You feel restored again. The vibrations are restored. Holding a secret and lie, the vibrations are different. So even just the concept of honesty or integrity is completely vibrational, and it impacts the person themselves in terms of their own health. And then if you do have integrity and honesty vibrating within you, it's just going to vibrate out. You're going to be much more likely to be honest with others because it's already vibrating in you, those vibrations, and that's what you're going to bring to relationships and to society and to people around you.
A very literal example of it was popping up in my mind. I don't know how well this fits, but when we think of a polygraph test, I'm picturing the needle going, and when we're telling the truth, it's one thing. If I'm lying, it's going crazy. It's almost like I'm seeing that as a visual representation of what we're talking about. The vibes are just off. So there's a physiological change in the body going on when there is deception. The body does not like that. The body does not sit well with deception occurring. So this feels like more than just a hypothetical concept or idea. It feels very real as we're talking about it.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on, right? We're talking on a vibrational level, but just even the body has signals that there's a difference between honesty and dishonesty. And the polygraph would be one example. And a lot of people dial in intuitively to this idea. We know intuitively as humans, lying is harmful. That's very intuitive. Honesty, healthy. Lying can't really be healthy. So there's something very organic, intuitive that it resonates, this idea of frequencies, vibrations, creating health or the lack of health, whether it's interpersonal, whether it's about sexuality or not, whether it's within a friendship, whether it's in society and how a government's treating its citizens. Dishonesty is a vibration. It's going to promote disease. And honesty is a vibration. It's going to promote health, socially, relationally, societally, culturally, all of it. These are vibrations. Intentionally manipulated reality versus intentionally accurate, authentic reality. One promotes disease, one promotes health.
That's such a compelling vision of integrity and why men and really everybody might see integrity as a foundational value for themselves and for those around them. I do want to just shift us slightly now to another question I have for you, which I think relates to a lot of what we've talked about already today. So one of the things I find is that in this model, in this work that I do, particularly with men, we'll talk about compulsive entitled sexuality. So we'll start bringing in that entitlement piece of it. And then we'll bring in the idea of the man box, like we've talked about today, and these scripts we've spoken about. And for some men, that's very clear, very obvious, and it's highlighting some of the conscious views and beliefs that they have. But for many others, it's highlighting things that they wouldn't explicitly agree with, but are sort of held on a subconscious level, or perhaps they take the form of an assumed belief rather than a consciously held one. Now, once it's really opened up to them, especially in this extraordinary intentional space we talk about, they can see it, but prior to that, it's just something that they're not really aware of. So I think if I were to ask the average man in the street, do you believe you should use violence or deception over using your voice? They'd probably say, well, of course I don't. Of course it's better to use your voice. If I were to ask them if they feel men are entitled to have their sexual desires fulfilled by women, they'd probably say, well, no, I don't believe that. But when we have these discussions, when we become truly curious about ourselves, we'll often find, if we're honest, these subconscious drivers and assumptions going on, and that might be very uncomfortable for us. So it seems to me like that fits into this integration or wholeness piece that we've talked about. So I'd love to get some of your thoughts on that. So when it's an assumed subconscious belief rather than something I explicitly believe, how do I get in touch with that? How do I incorporate that into my journey?
Really great question, Chris. So whenever you look at power dynamics, right, the group that has the power, especially when there's an abuse of power going on, and especially in, systemic types of power dynamics, whether it's gender, race, money, whatever, there's all kinds of different power dynamics. But usually the group that has the power is not invested in studying or shining a light on their power and how they're misusing it or abusing humans with it. And so when it comes to male power and masculinity, we're not socialized to study our power and privilege in the ways that we're hurting people. In fact, we're really encouraged not to think about it at all. So many men I work with say, hey, Dr. Minwalla, I had a secret sexual life for years and I just didn't think much about it. The ability to go unexamined lacking introspection, right? Jackson Katz in his TED Talk talks about the ability to go unexamined, lacking introspection, and to go unchallenged. Nobody in society is challenging men to look at the secret sexual basement. So there's all this collusion and institutional collusion. Everyone's remaining silent. Nobody's really bringing up these issues. And they're largely rendered unconscious for most of society. This toxic shaping and these toxic outcomes, and the secret sexual basement being one of them, right? A lot of people say, Dr. Minwalla, why do people build basements? And I'm looking at, if it's a guy, a man who built a basement, male socialization is one of the huge answers right there. And so part of the healing and coming out of all of this is just turning on the lights and encouraging men. First of all, just normalizing. Of course, you didn't study male sexual entitlement. Of course, nobody said, hey, let's study our power as men and how we're abusing people. That wouldn't be fun. So we're very invested in actually not seeing. And if you're part of the group that has the power, you have to do extra work to turn towards it and look at it, because you have the luxury to not look at it. The people being abused by that power, they're well aware of it and looking at it because they're living in it. The people with the power that are abusing, they're probably not looking at it and studying it and reflecting on their power and how it's hurting people. In fact, they're probably turning away from that and denying it. So for men to look at their own power and how it's harmful, and to look at these scripts that they've had the luxury not to look at for years, and society's not asking them to look at it and how they've been shaped. No one's asking them to look at it and how they've been shaped. It's so normalized and unconscious. So you're really right. The work really begins with understanding all of that, and then being on a journey of deliberate, conscious, with a lot of effort and energy, turning towards our power as men and looking at it and how we're hurting people, and being very intentional to start studying that topic. Because the library is full of journal articles on male entitlement and male sexual entitlement. And there's a lot of research and a lot we understand about all of that, but it's all in the feminist section. And there's not a lot of guys in there taking notes and furiously studying those topics. And if there are, they don't have a very loud voice and platform that are reaching a lot of men out there. So it's an uphill battle of illuminating what we've enjoyed not seeing, right? We've enjoyed the privilege and the luxury of not seeing any of this, our harm towards those who are more vulnerable based on masculinity scripts. So you're really right. A big part of the work is just illuminating and then helping men turn towards this difficult material to look at. But by doing so, they're really getting a chance to get to know, how have I been shaped and what needs to change for me? And what are the toxic outcomes I can see in my life? A big part of this is making the unconscious conscious first, and giving people a reason why they would invest in that. Why would I get to know how my power has hurt people, right? And with the secret sexual basement, it's obvious the whole basement is in part based on these scripts and normalizing this kind of abuse to the point where the A word is not even there in society. When we think of infidelity, we don't think abuse. So that's still in the dark. And then you have to ask yourself, why is it in the dark? And is it in the dark for a reason? The answer is yes. And I just described the reason, right? Men are invested in having that right and ability to have a secret sexual life, wink, wink. If you take that away, it's going to change the power structure we'll have to learn how to use our voice and not have basements. That's a profound shift in human gender. Men have for centuries relied on secret sexual lives to live life. And if you take that away, it's going to completely change how we define masculinity. So in some ways, we can't afford to see the basement as abuse. And that's when I bring up betrayal, trauma, blindness, right? When you can't afford to see the abuse because it'll change too much and shatter your world too much. And maybe we're not ready to see the basement as abuse because it's too close to home and it would require too much change. All really interesting ideas, huh?
Yeah, and it's a tough ask, right? To be asking the people that hold the power and have the privileges of that power to be the ones to be willing to look at it and to give up and redress that power imbalance. It's a pretty tough sell, and it's another reason it almost comes back to this self-contact for me. I need a certain amount of ego strength if that's the message I want to put out to the world, because it's not necessarily going to be a popular message. And it strikes me that with this work, sometimes it takes something as severe as reality fracturing as the discovery of the secret sexual basement and the huge fallout, the sort of nuclear fallout of that. It takes that big an event for the guy to be willing to really honestly look at that. You know, his ego is fragmenting through that process. And so maybe there's more of an openness to it over time. But I just think there's something in that it sometimes takes that much for the guy to be able to change course.
Yes, I think the story of the secret sexual basement really brings people to their knees and forces taking a look at this, which is why there's so many men who come to my program. How do I get so many men to come and listen how they've been abusive? Well, they're in pain. That's why. They only come to me once there's pain and consequences. They're not coming to me before that, when everything's fine and the secret basement's being maintained. And a lot of times it's the sheer pain and the consequences that make them turn towards sexual entitlement and being open to listening about it. Also, you brought up a really interesting statement around whatever group of humans has the power. It's a hard ask for them to release or surrender some of that and share. I just find that fascinating because I think there's an alternative, right? Just because you have power, I'm not sure if surrendering some of that is a bad thing. I think sharing power can be a really awesome thing. And so you're not losing necessarily when you surrender power that's legitimately not yours anyway. And when we learn how to share power, distribute power, move power around where it makes sense, I think that's a much healthier way of thinking. Because when you do have groups who have power, no matter what the dynamic, it often does come down to, well, how do you ask that group to surrender some of that? And it's very common to think any group with power is not going to want to lose it. And we get trapped in that. But I think there's a way out, which is sharing power. Doesn't mean you're going to have none. No one's saying you have to let go of all of it. But yeah, sharing power, what a concept.
And would it be fair to say that it's not just about giving up power, as in it's not about becoming powerless, but it's also about using the power I have in a generative way? You used that word earlier, using the power I have to lift other people up rather than using it to suppress other people.
Yes, because when you get to know yourself and love yourself and have a relationship with yourself and a very consolidated ego, that's internal power. And that's a very different kind of power than external power where you're one up over and you're dominating. That's external power. And that's the kind of power that we're used to thinking about. There's probably a lot of value in redefining power. What is power? And there's an internal power where you don't need the outside to manage the inside as much. There's also internal resources and capacities to self manage. And having that internal awareness, that internal adequate self worth, all of that creates a very strong sense of self, a very healthy ego, creates a lot of ego strength. And that's actually the kind of power that is part of healthy masculinity, not external power dominating and being one up over. So it's actually developing a different definition of the word power, internal versus external, domination versus internal strength and capacities.
So if my relationship with myself is strong, I don't need to be one up over others in order to feel powerful.
Exactly. Yeah. We know when we look at kids on the playground, or, the person who's picking on someone is probably not feeling good about themselves. And they probably feel inferior, and picking on someone and putting someone down is making them feel one up to compensate for their feeling one down. We know all of this. So yes, when people need to dominate, it's a reflection of their own internal inadequacy and lack of sense of power inside. And to compensate, they need to dominate.
Yeah. And how often, as we've talked about, is a secret sexual basement an expression of exactly that in some way?
Yes, because when you have a secret sexual basement or a secret sexual life, you're automatically in a one-up position because you're intentionally withholding life-altering information. And so you've just put yourself in a one-up position. You're now holding a secret that they don't know upstairs, and you're controlling that information. And you're holding them hostage to a reality they didn't consent to or know about. They didn't consent to living on top of a secret sexual basement. So in that way, it's a form of covert domination and control. Having a secret sexual life is actually holding someone hostage to a reality they didn't consent to, and you're subjecting them to IMR, intentionally manipulated reality, the whole time. So yes, having a secret sexual basement is a form of external domination, control, power over.
Seems like what we're challenged with doing is providing a compelling vision that there is a better way to be, that isn't just about lowering yourself, reducing yourself. It's actually a powerful, connected, intimate way to be that is actually better than living in a compartmentalized way. So that's the great challenge, providing that vision, and honest, loving whole as foundational frequencies or vibrations for that seems to be a really good place to start.
Yes, and creating a house that's full of IAR instead of IMR, intentionally accurate, authentic reality, creating relationships and houses and families where there's no basement, no one's being subjected to IMR. You're living in a system of truth and honesty. Also, subjecting people to a whole system for years of intentionally manipulated reality instead of intentionally accurate, authentic reality. Another way of saying that is having a secret sexual basement is subjecting the people upstairs to a system of injustice. The word just means fair. Justice means treating people fairly and acting fairly. And so one vision is to create families, create houses of fairness where there's no basement, and creating a system of fairness and justice instead of injustice. So that's another concept. How do we create houses and families and relationships that are honest and vibrate IAR, intentionally accurate, authentic reality? How do we create houses, families, and relationships that are fair and no one's tricking or fooling each other? And there's fair treatment going on in the house, a system of justice instead of injustice.
There's just so much there to think through, and zooming out and seeing that bigger picture, that bigger vision of what recovery looks like. But I can unfortunately see, looking at the clock, that we are at the end of our time now. I've hugely appreciated this conversation. I think this has really taken what we spoke about with integrity, intimacy, integration, really moved that forward into this idea of honest, loving, and whole. But more importantly, in a sense, I think we've really brought out that gender piece again and just how important that is in this work. So it's been a privilege to spend the time with you talking about that. And I look forward to speaking with you more again in the future.
Yes, Chris, it's an honor. I really enjoy these conversations and being able to talk to you and go into some depth on all of this. So it's a real privilege and honor for me too. And I look forward to our next coffee with Chris Jones and Dr. Minwalla.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the From Harm to Healing podcast. If you'd like to find out more information about the deceptive sexuality trauma model itself, you can visit minwallamodel.com. If you're interested in the services that I offer, in particular the From Harm to Healing treatment program, please visit chrisjonestherapy.co.uk.